Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Lee Griffin. I'm a Senior Engineering Manager for Red Hat based out of Waterford in Ireland. I'm also studying in Waterford Institute of Technology for a Lean Masters in Enterprise Excellence. Today I want to talk to you about how we implemented lean practices in our Scrum team to adapt to remote work that was enforced upon the entire world back in March of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the start of our experience of trying to implement lean, and I'm going to share some of the challenges and some of the successes that we've encountered. So why Scrum? So Scrum is dominant, and the 14th State of Agile report, which came out last year, is showing the market share is in and around the high 70s to 80% if you include some of the hybrid approaches towards Scrum. It's highly prevalent, and the top 5 agile techniques reported across all of the teams implementing some form of agile in their workplace shows that the core Scrum ceremonies are largely present across the board. So Scrum has become ubiquitous, and it has now become a focal point for teams to deliver the best value in the shortest time possible. Our team has been following Scrum for around 9 months before the pandemic. We had a good experience with software methodologies and processes, but we had really formalized on Scrum as the pandemic approached. And our team was a mix of experienced remote workers geographically spread around the world, as well as in-office based workers. So we were very much a hybrid team. And we used practices to complement Scrum. So we didn't narrow ourselves to just speaking about Scrum, and we tried to self-identify as an agile team. And the practices going on the Scrum Master Trends report from 2019 that most teams use in addition to Scrum is Kanban, with a lot of DevOps related practices coming in as well. TDD and XP also appear, and that's very much centered around software engineering based teams. So our team were very open to new approaches, new technologies, and new means to improve our workload and improve our flow. Our team has implemented Kanban, but more from the visual aspect of it. We don't have a strict adherence to the pull-based system, and it's unclear whether teams implement this to the letter of the law. So some of the Scrum challenges that we've encountered as a remote team before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. The first is distractions. So every Scrum course that you train for Certified Scrum Master, Product Owner, and even the Scrum Guide and the recent release in addition to the Scrum Guide still hasn't quite challenged the perception that Scrum is most successful when it's run in-house with people and sticky notes and the in-person interactions. And while that brings great benefits, the reality is people are working from home. The reality for a company like Red Hat is that we hire the best engineers, irrespective of location, and we make it work. So if people are strong and talented and have the passions for the work they're doing, we have to adapt our processes to make sure that we can accommodate that. But one of the challenges that Scrum brings when you're not in the same room is distractions. So you're on your screen, you're on your video conference chatting to your team, and on the other screen, you're getting messages. You're getting instant messages. You're getting messages on pull requests, on technical items. You have children knocking on the door now that everyone is forced to be at home. Families have the support structures taken away from them to enable them to do their best work. And people like to send emails, and emails has become very dominant in our industry, especially with the pandemic. The email count has gone up statistically across the board. Scrum also has a lot of issues with the duration of ceremonies. The duration that they recommend is up to a certain time limit. And most teams tend to take that limit because it's a nice way for the team to break down work, it's a nice way for the team to interact. But spending anything up to 8 hours on a sprint planning session is not useful right now in a remote team setting. They don't align with ergonomic best practices for remote work, which should see you take a break roughly 10 minutes out of every hour. Fatigue and meeting apathy were experienced within our team, that people were becoming mentally and physically drained from constant meetings. And the suggestion of adding more meetings to try and break down work was becoming problematic. That is when we decided that we had a problem with Scrum from a remote team perspective. Because what we were experiencing was the team were now trying to follow a mechanical version of Scrum rather than the mental version of Scrum. And I'll chat more about that later in the presentation. Now, if we pair all this with challenges that are not specific to Scrum, but challenges specific to remote working right now, a lot of companies had their IT policies formalized by COVID-19. So IT policies were not equipped for work from home. People have inadequate home office setups. A lot of people were reporting that they were working from kitchen tables, and not having the right equipment can create additional distractions and problems when people are trying to get through their workday. So this has created the perfect storm of challenges that are manifested more predominantly by using the Scrum framework to the letter of the Scrum guide. Now, Scrum is inherently wasteful. One of the issues with Scrum is pairing it with known processes, and known processes that large enterprises and their customers expect. One of those is the ability to deliver on a time frame and for customers to buy into the future view that you are projecting for your product or service. That's often termed a roadmap. And roadmaps necessitate the team to try and plan several sprints ahead. And a lot of teams form these quarterly boundaries to try and do a planning session to exit after 3 months with a lot of functionality. And obviously stage releases can occur in between then. Planning those several sprints ahead was something we analysed as a team, and we done a value stream mapping from when the product owner receives the requirements through to the various reviews that have to happen from a technical capacity, the stakeholder interviews, the team reviews, and eventually the planning sessions that will lead to the team committing to this for the following quarter to deliver on time for their roadmap. This had a lot of waste. This had a lot of wasted time waiting on processes, waiting on meeting times, waiting on availability. With time zones and people working remotely, the calendars were finding it very hard to align. And we discovered our activity ratio was around 10.66%. So that meant that nearly 90% of the time was time spent idle. And that time spent idle was a genuine waste. And we wanted to take that idle time and put it to better use. That was our motivation for this. We also looked at the backlog size. So typically, teams try to plan several sprints ahead. And we ran a Little's Law comparison on our team. So Little's Law is looking at when you will be serviced based on the arrival rate and based on the average time for servicing. And we had over 2 years of a duration of a backlog if it remained static. Now that's a problem because backlogs are designed to be dynamic. They're designed to work on the highest priority item first. And having a 2-year backlog didn't sound very agile to us, and we wanted to try and address that. The ticket breakdown approach to sprint planning was also very wasteful, we found. When we encountered our sprint planning sessions and we had 8 people on a call, and that's replicated across multiple teams, we had 1 or 2 people predominantly doing the talking. That's typically your technical lead, your subject matter expert, the person with the most experience, and the rest of the team were in a very passive mode. Huge benefits to being in a passive mode from a learning experience and sharing knowledge. But those people could have consumed that in another way and another format and been more productive in that up to 8-hour meeting that sprint planning takes from a ticket breakdown perspective. There's also a high touch communication for coordination. Scrum is all about information radiation. It's all about keeping people up to date on what's happening. Constant touch points with the team, with stakeholders, with community members, with anyone that has an interest in the project and the outcome. That costs a lot of money, that costs a lot of time. And the cost here is magnified when working from home because the in-person interactions mean you have to be more verbose on the likes of emails and on the likes of instant messages to ensure that the context and the point gets across clearly. And as mentioned, this becomes very wasteful when we try to adapt to fit an existing process such as quarterly planning and roadmaps. And that is very much prevalent in multinationals, which have to have this level of guarantee for customers from a sales and revenue perspective. So most companies and most teams will have to massage the Scrum framework into existing processes to ensure compliance and to ensure success for the product and the company. Now, some of the adaptations that we made initially focused on the Scrum ceremonies. So remote work thrives on asynchronous communication. It thrives on the ability to send a message and receive a response at some time in that working day. We wanted to break the model where we had to have instantaneous responses, which is normally what you get in video conferencing, where you have to drag people to a meeting for 15 minutes or longer to find out what they're working on. So we moved the daily Scrum to instant messaging. Anytime blockers emerged, we would absolutely jump on a call to try and debug them and utilize the quick turnaround and benefits of verbal communication. But in general, for updates, for debugging of items that aren't priorities and aren't a blocker in the immediate term, we defaulted instant messaging. The backlog adaptation. So as a team, we had backlog refinement calls, but not nearly as many as we could have. And we wanted to put a focal point on refining the backlog to try and de-emphasize the need for quarterly planning and phased implementations of conversations with stakeholders and reviews. So by having consistent backlog refinement calls, we were in a better position to identify the size of the backlog and what we wanted to do. So we implemented a hard work in progress limit on the backlog of 8 initiatives, which was enough to fulfill our Scrum team for up to a year. That satisfied the need to have a roadmap that was forward facing, but also removed the wastage of investigating time, energy and resources into items that were 12 plus months away. This also passively gave our stakeholders more value because now we were laser focused on the most important items coming up in the next couple of months. We also used these refinement calls to further break down the tickets that would ultimately be used to build the initiative that was requested. So we took our user stories and we ran a technical granular breakdown, but we done it in a just-in-time manner and disconnected it from the sprint planning ceremony so that we were able to enter the sprint planning and have an overview and a review from the technical lead or the SME that had the most knowledge. This meant that we still got the passive benefits of sharing knowledge, but in a greatly accelerated means. That technical lead did not have to do it in a just-in-time manner in that meeting, but took it over his or her working week and managed to break it down and get the level of depth and wasn't slowed down by questions from the team who are trying to understand the thought process in an in-flight mode of breaking down. When it's completed, that challenges and those questions still came, but it was much easier to identify the answer versus doing it in flight. And by removing these silent observers, we gained a lot more throughput for the team out of that sprint planning exercise and reduced our sprint planning call by 25% initially. And as time went on and we got more used to this style, it was a 50% reduction in the end. Processes and tools is a very interesting one from an Agile perspective. So the Agile Manifesto always talks about individual interactions over processes and tools. And a lot of Agile teams seem to miss the little small print on the Agile Manifesto that talks about being more valuable for items on the left, but we should not ignore the items on the right. So tooling is hugely important in a remote team. We had a definition of done, which helped guarantee the quality and the value of the work that we were delivering. And we looked at automating that and investing time into the tooling to automate that gating mechanisms to ensure that our work got over the line and validated the acceptance criteria. At a more granular software engineering term, this looked like having gates on pull requests coming into our repositories to ensure that testing passed, to ensure the integration testing passed, to have static analysis tools like SonarQube run on your code to show that you have minimum code issues coming through. We had defined thresholds for what was acceptable for code coverage, trying to land between 75 and 85% of the code being covered. We tried to look at duplications, we tried to look at code smells, and all of that being performed in an automated manner saved a lot of time for our individuals to not have to go through manual reviews at that level. That in turn translated to greater throughput within the team. We also invested heavily in observability and monitoring. So a lot of software engineering work can be defined as muda or waste, and that work is actually bug fixes. There's very few software products out there that release a perfect product. I've yet to encounter it. There will always be bugs. But bugs that come in are typically fixed as fast as possible and sent back out, and the team move on to the next bug or the next challenge. We tried to look at this from a lean perspective about trying to eliminate bugs entirely by doing root cause analysis, doing the equivalent of Gemba walks or the Gemba approach, by looking at the bug and trying to figure out the root problem. We done this using fishbone diagrams, cause and effect, 5 whys, and other lean-oriented tools to try and identify the characteristics of the bug and how it was identified and how we discovered it. That led to us investing in more monitoring tools, the implementation of Prometheus and Grafana, other tools like that to allow us monitor and get a feel for what's going wrong and why. And every time we fixed a bug, we had the root cause analysis identify the cause to try and put in a more permanent fix. And that fix could be at a code level, could be at a tooling level, or could be at a process level. And that really helped us adapt the Scrum team to be more reactive and more streamlined by removing this constant wastage and this view that we have to keep fixing problems and getting the team into a more stabilized manner, but more forward facing, allowing us to look at new initiatives rather than battling with the old technical debt that we had to deal with. We also looked at a more lightweight means of gathering proposals and came across this concept of an epic brief. So epics are the grand vision of what a feature or product is going to be, and it's a combination of multiple user stories, as we know. And epics often came to us with what was known as a BRD or a PRD, a business process document, which has the full business requirements identified for why we want this feature and what the benefits are. That's a very dense document, and from a software team perspective, we're only interested in a subset of that. So we came up with a concept of a single page brief for that epic, where stakeholders could still send in the same level of detail in a condensed manner and allow the team getting an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it, allowing them to progress how we as a team are going to implement this as a change. And that drastically reduced our lead time on initiatives flowing from a state of just being submitted to being considered for upcoming quarterly plannings and sprint allocations. So to conclude, we made slight tweaks to the Scrum process to remove the very visible waste that we had observed, but waste that we didn't tackle before, because the ability for the team to still meet in person was overcoming some of the negativities that we had observed and felt around Scrum as a framework. This to us has formed a much more resilient version of Scrum. This resiliency is something that is really important to us, because we want this to be long-lasting, transformative change within the team and within the product. I talked earlier about the team doing mechanical agile or mechanical Scrum. That meant that the team could go in and execute as per the Scrum guide on how a sprint planning session should work, how a review should work, how a retrospective should work. But the team, because of fatigue, because of meeting apathy, and because of frustrations with the wastage endured by the usage of Scrum, were missing the reasons why we were doing that. That's the mental agile aspect. And there's a lot more research to be done around that side of it to get teams mentally agile and creating a long-lasting transformative effect. The work-life balance in the team has stabilized over the 6 months or so we introduced the lean aspects to it. So the team struggled initially with being at home with kids in the background. You may have heard my kids in the background talking and shouting when I was recording this presentation. That's the new norm, that's the new reality. But now, with this approach where we've streamlined the processes and allowed them work in a very minimal oriented environment for Scrum, it's given them more time in their day to get their work done and finish on time, or even finish early and enjoy some quality family time. And that's hugely important to us in Red Hat. And we maintained 100% quarter-on-quarter delivery of goals during a pandemic. That's something we're very proud of. As a team, we had been delivering on quarters and had built up from a 90% delivery in our first attempt as a Scrum team to 100% just before the pandemic hit. And over the course of the pandemic, we've now had 2 quarters of software development projects delivered, and we've reported 100% success rate on it. So the tweaks, the changes did not diminish our ability to deliver quality products to our communities and to our customers. And in terms of future work, this is an exceptionally exciting area. This is why I've gone back to college to study a master's, to try and get more experience with lean, because the research is showing that less than 1% of teams are applying a lean approach from an agile context. Scrum is so flexible as a framework that it can assume these additions and take on some of the additional aspects of lean and the benefits they have. When the more obvious waste were removed, we had noticeable improvements. And that is before we get more data and have a look at the more complex aspects of Scrum that are ripe for a leaning out process. I firmly believe this is a rich research domain for high collaboration approaches, and lean is all about collaboration. It's all about culture, and it's all about how teams work together. And a lot of the agile and Scrum research in recent years is moving more towards coaching and leadership and scale. And lean has solved this at a manufacturing level, at a level that Scrum can only dream about. So there's a lot to be learned from lean that I'm hoping I can apply to Scrum teams. And this paradigm shift to remote work as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic, it's going to see changes to how we work in the future. Even when the pandemic goes, teams will still continue to work from home. There's too many benefits from both a cost perspective, an environment perspective, and a work-life balance perspective that teams will be at a hybrid model at a minimum. If not, some companies will be fully remote. And these are going to see challenges magnify for teams. The current couple of months that people have been working from home is temporary, but if this becomes a long-term paradigm shift to remote work, it's going to become an increasing challenge. And thank you for listening to my presentation today. I can be contacted on lgriffin@redhat.com, and I am on Twitter @LeeGriffin. Thank you for your time, and I wish you a great day. Take care.